Welcome to Viral Lens Report, where mysteries unfold, secrets are exposed, and the stories everyone is talking about come to life. From shocking true crime cases to unbelievable real-world events, we bring you the facts, the clues, and the twists you never saw coming. Subscribe now and join thousands of viewers uncovering the truth, one story at a time. This is Viral Lens Report. Let's dive in.
The investigation into the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie has taken another unexpected turn, as investigators and experts continue to question one of the most controversial aspects of the case, the ransom notes. For months, the possibility of a kidnapping for ransom has remained at the center of the investigation. Messages reportedly sent to media outlets claimed that Nancy had been taken and demanded a large cryptocurrency payment. But now, questions are emerging about whether those messages were ever genuine. According to reports, some investigators within the FBI believe that at least some of the ransom notes may have been fabricated. If that is true, it could dramatically change the way the entire case is understood. But not everyone agrees. Other investigators and reporters familiar with the case continue to believe that at least some of the communications may have been connected to Nancy's disappearance. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente and defense attorney Mark Garagos have reportedly challenged the idea that every ransom note should simply be dismissed as fake. Their position raises another possibility. Perhaps the messages were real, but the person behind them was not necessarily motivated by money alone. That question becomes even more complicated when investigators examine the Bitcoin transaction. According to reports, authorities sent cryptocurrency to the wallet identified in one of the ransom demands. The purpose was presumably to determine whether the person behind the demand would accept the payment and potentially provide information about Nancy's whereabouts. But the money was never claimed, and that creates a mystery within the mystery. If the ransom demand was genuine, why was the cryptocurrency never collected? Did the person behind the wallet never have access to it? Was the entire demand a hoax? Or did the person responsible become frightened after realizing that investigators were monitoring the transaction? There is another possibility that cannot be ignored. Perhaps the person who sent the ransom message never intended to collect the money at all. Maybe the communication had another purpose entirely. A ransom note does not always have to be about money. It could be intended to distract investigators. It could be designed to create confusion. It could be an attempt to control the narrative. Or it could be part of a larger plan that investigators have not yet uncovered. The truth may depend on determining who actually wrote the messages and what they knew about Nancy. That is why investigators continue to examine the language, timing, and details contained in the communications. If the writer knew information that had not been made public, that could potentially indicate a connection to the crime. But if the information was publicly available, the significance could be very different. And then there is the question of whether all of the messages came from the same person. Perhaps they did. Perhaps they did not. If multiple people were involved, investigators could be looking at a much more complicated sequence of events than a single kidnapping. The uncertainty surrounding the ransom notes has forced investigators and experts to reconsider another major piece of evidence, the surveillance footage showing a masked individual outside Nancy's home. The person seen in the video has become one of the most important figures in the investigation, even though the individual's identity remains unknown. The footage reportedly shows someone wearing a mask and gloves near Nancy's home. But experts examining the behavior have raised an unexpected possibility. The person may not have been a highly experienced criminal. In fact, the suspect may have made mistakes. The movements reportedly appeared clumsy. The individual appeared to struggle with the security system. The person took risks that an experienced offender might have avoided. And some of the clothing and physical characteristics visible in the footage may have provided investigators with more information than the suspect realized. That possibility is significant because it could change the profile of the person investigators are searching for. The public often imagines a carefully planned kidnapping as the work of a highly sophisticated criminal organization. But what if the person responsible was not sophisticated at all? What if the crime was carried out by someone with limited experience? Someone who thought they had planned the operation but made mistakes under pressure? Someone who did not understand how much evidence they might leave behind? If that is the case, the mistakes visible in the surveillance footage could eventually become the key to identifying the suspect. The individual may have believed the mask was enough to hide their identity. But investigators can look beyond the face. They can examine height, body structure, walking patterns, the way a person moves their arms, the way they carry objects, the clothing they wear, the shoes on their feet, the way they interact with the environment. All of these details can potentially contribute to an identification. And sometimes, the smallest mistake can become the most important clue. The suspect may have believed that interfering with the doorbell camera would eliminate the risk of being recorded. But instead, the attempt to manipulate the camera may have created another piece of evidence. The person may have believed that gloves would prevent forensic evidence from being left behind. But gloves do not necessarily prevent DNA transfer. They do not necessarily prevent hair from falling. They do not prevent fibers from transferring. They do not prevent digital evidence from being created. And they certainly do not prevent a person from being recognized by someone who knows them. This raises another possibility. The person responsible may have told someone, a friend, a family member, a romantic partner, a coworker, a roommate. Someone may have noticed unusual behavior. Someone may have heard a strange confession. Someone may have seen clothing or objects that suddenly appeared after Nancy disappeared. Someone may have noticed that a person was behaving differently. And investigators believe that person could eventually become the key to the case. Criminal investigations are often solved not only by physical evidence, but by human relationships. People talk. People confess. People brag. People make mistakes. And sometimes people who initially remain silent eventually decide that they cannot continue carrying the secret. That possibility becomes especially important if Nancy's disappearance was committed by someone who had little experience with serious crimes. An inexperienced offender may be more likely to make mistakes. They may be more likely to panic. They may be more likely to tell someone. And they may be more likely to leave behind evidence without realizing its significance. The blood evidence found near Nancy's front door may provide another important clue. Experts examining the evidence have reportedly considered the possibility that Nancy resisted her attacker. One theory suggests that she may have been suddenly awakened or confronted near the entrance to her home. Imagine the possibility. An elderly woman, inside her own home, suddenly confronted by an unknown person wearing a mask. She may not have understood what was happening. She may have resisted. A struggle may have followed. And during that confrontation, Nancy may have suffered an injury. The blood evidence could potentially be consistent with such a scenario. But investigators must be careful. Blood evidence can tell a story, but it does not tell the entire story by itself. It may indicate that Nancy was injured. It may indicate where she was when the blood was deposited. But it does not automatically reveal who injured her. It does not tell investigators what happened immediately afterward. And it does not establish whether the attack was planned or spontaneous. Still, the possibility of a struggle creates an important question. If Nancy was attacked inside or near her home, was that attack the original plan? Or did something go wrong? That question leads directly to one of the most significant theories now being considered. Perhaps the disappearance was not originally intended to be a kidnapping. Perhaps it began as something else. A burglary, a home invasion, a robbery, and then something unexpected happened. The intruder encountered Nancy. The situation escalated. Nancy was injured, and the offender suddenly found themselves facing a much more serious crime. If that scenario occurred, the ransom notes could have been an attempt to create a completely different narrative. A person who committed a violent home invasion might attempt to make the case appear to be a kidnapping. The ransom demands could have been designed to send investigators in another direction. But there is an equally important question. If the crime was a planned kidnapping, why does the suspect appear so inexperienced? Why would someone planning a major abduction make so many apparent mistakes? Why take unnecessary risks? Why leave evidence? Why interact with the security system? Why appear on camera? These questions do not prove that the crime was spontaneous, but they do create a contradiction that investigators must examine. The case may involve a carefully planned crime carried out poorly. Or it may involve a poorly planned crime that became something much more serious. Those are two very different scenarios, and the evidence may eventually reveal which one is closer to the truth. Another mystery concerns the identity of the person who targeted Nancy in the first place. Why Nancy? That question has become increasingly important. She was 84 years old. She had mobility limitations. She depended on medication. She was not an obvious target for a conventional kidnapping. If the goal was money, why choose someone who might be difficult to transport? Why take the risk of entering her home? Why expose yourself to security cameras? Why potentially leave behind forensic evidence? And if the crime was motivated by financial gain, why was the ransom cryptocurrency never claimed? These questions have led some experts to consider a different possibility. Maybe money was never the real motive. Perhaps Nancy was targeted for personal reasons. Investigators have reportedly not ruled out the possibility that Nancy herself, or even her connection to Savannah Guthrie, may have made her a specific target. A person could theoretically have developed an obsession, a grudge, a personal fixation, or some other motive that has nothing to do with financial gain. This theory is difficult to prove, but it is important because it could explain why someone would target a vulnerable elderly woman instead of choosing an easier opportunity. Perhaps the person responsible was not looking for a random victim. Perhaps they were looking for Nancy. If that is true, investigators need to know why. Was there a previous connection? Had Nancy encountered someone who later became obsessed with her? Was someone angry with the family? Was someone seeking revenge? Or did the person responsible simply believe that Nancy's connection to a famous television personality made her valuable? Every possibility creates another question, and the answers may depend on understanding the person behind the mask. The investigation has also raised concerns about the handling of the crime scene during the early stages. Former investigators have reportedly criticized the initial response, arguing that federal investigators should have been involved immediately because of the importance of preserving potential forensic evidence. This criticism has created another unresolved issue. Could evidence have been lost? Could evidence have been contaminated? Could something important have been overlooked? These are serious questions in any major criminal investigation. The first hours after a crime can be critical. A scene can be disturbed. Objects can be moved. DNA can degrade. Fingerprints can disappear. And evidence that might have been obvious on the first day may become impossible to recover later. If the investigation eventually depends on a tiny piece of forensic evidence, questions about the original handling of the scene could become even more significant. But there is still hope, because modern forensic technology has changed dramatically. DNA evidence that once seemed useless can sometimes be analyzed with advanced techniques. A mixed DNA sample may contain more information than investigators initially realized. A hair that appears insignificant could potentially contain genetic material. And even when a suspect's DNA is not directly found in a criminal database, forensic genetic genealogy can sometimes help investigators identify relatives and narrow down a family line. This does not mean DNA will automatically solve Nancy's case, but it creates a potential path forward. If investigators can obtain a reliable genetic profile, they may eventually be able to compare it against known individuals. If there is no direct match, they may look for relatives. From there, investigators could potentially build a family tree and narrow the possibilities. The process can take time, but it has transformed investigations across the country. And in a case where the identity of the masked individual remains unknown, DNA could be the breakthrough that investigators need. There is also the surveillance footage. The person seen outside Nancy's home may have believed that the mask made identification impossible. But investigators may not need a perfect image of the face. They may need only enough information to narrow the field. The person's physical build, their height, their posture, their gait, the way they move, their clothing, their shoes, the backpack, the gloves, the way they interact with the camera. All of these details can potentially become part of an investigative profile. And if someone recognizes the person, the footage could become even more valuable. That is where the public may play an important role. Someone may see the footage and recognize a neighbor, a former employee, a friend, a relative. Someone they know may have suddenly changed their behavior after Nancy disappeared. Someone may have owned similar clothing. Someone may have had access to a vehicle that investigators have not yet publicly connected to the case. And someone may know something they have never told anyone. That person could be the key. Because every criminal investigation contains a human element.
Someone sees something. Someone hears something.
Someone remembers something. And sometimes someone keeps a secret. The question is whether that secret can remain hidden forever. As the investigation continues, the possibility that someone close to the offender could eventually come forward remains one of the most important potential avenues. The person responsible may have told someone. Perhaps not directly. Perhaps through a strange comment, a confession, a drunken conversation, a sudden change in behavior, or simply an unexplained possession. Sometimes people reveal more than they realize. And sometimes the person listening does not understand the importance of what they heard until much later. That is why investigators continue to appeal for information. Because the breakthrough may not come from the suspect. It may come from someone standing next to the suspect. The case has now reached a point where investigators are left with several competing possibilities. Perhaps the ransom notes were genuine. Perhaps they were fake. Perhaps some were real and others were not. Perhaps the person who wrote them was directly involved. Perhaps someone else was attempting to exploit the disappearance. Perhaps the crime was planned. Perhaps it was spontaneous. Perhaps Nancy was targeted because of her family. Perhaps she was targeted for personal reasons. Perhaps the entire situation began as a burglary that spiraled into something far more serious. And perhaps the answers to all of these questions are hidden within the evidence investigators already possess. The challenge is connecting the pieces. The blood, the camera, the ransom notes, the Bitcoin wallet, the DNA, the timeline, the suspect's behavior, the unanswered questions. Each piece may appear to tell a different story, but only one story can explain what really happened. And that is what investigators are trying to uncover. The most important question may not be whether the ransom notes were real. It may be what the person behind them wanted investigators to believe. If the notes were fake, what was the purpose? If they were genuine, why was the Bitcoin never claimed? If the person wanted money, why take such enormous risks? If money was not the motive, why mention ransom at all? These questions could eventually reveal the mindset of the person responsible. And understanding motive can sometimes help identify an offender. A person motivated by money behaves differently from someone motivated by revenge. Someone driven by obsession behaves differently from someone committing a random crime. A professional criminal behaves differently from an inexperienced offender. The evidence may eventually reveal which profile fits. For now, the masked individual remains unidentified, but experts believe the person may have made mistakes. And mistakes can be difficult to hide forever. The suspect may have left DNA. The suspect may have left fibers. The suspect may have been captured from another angle. The suspect may have been seen by a witness. The suspect may have used a phone. The suspect may have driven a vehicle. The suspect may have purchased something connected to the crime. The suspect may have told someone. And every one of those possibilities represents another path investigators can explore. The case remains unsolved. But unsolved does not mean unsolvable. Sometimes the most important breakthrough comes months or years later.
À forensique technique à preuve.
A database expands. A witness changes their mind. A relationship ends. A secret becomes too difficult to carry. Or a person finally realizes that silence has consequences. Nancy Guthrie's family continues to wait for answers. And the questions remain as powerful as ever. Who took Nancy? Why was she targeted? Was the masked person the offender? Were the ransom notes real? Why was the cryptocurrency never collected? Was the crime planned? Or did it begin as something else? Did Nancy resist? What happened at the front door? Where is the missing DNA evidence leading? And who, somewhere, knows more than they have said? Those questions have kept the case alive. They have kept investigators searching. They have kept forensic experts examining evidence. And they have kept Nancy's story in the public eye. The hope is that the combination of DNA analysis, surveillance footage, digital evidence, and information from someone close to the offender will eventually reveal the truth. But until then, Nancy Guthrie remains missing. The masked figure remains unidentified. The ransom notes remain controversial. The motive remains uncertain. And the most important piece of the puzzle, the location of Nancy herself, remains unknown. Perhaps the next breakthrough will come from a laboratory. Perhaps it will come from a surveillance image. Perhaps it will come from a digital trail. Or perhaps it will come from a person who has spent months or years carrying a secret. Someone knows what happened. And eventually, investigators hope that person will speak. Because the truth is still out there. And until Nancy is found and her family receives the answers they have been waiting for, this investigation is not over.